Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Tip Tuesday. This is Jeffrey Nance here with you once again. Today's topic is how to deal with emotions. How can we have patience and discipline? I've been doing this for over a decade now. And one of the things that most people don't realize trading is actually going to do is be a bit of an emotional roller coaster for them. Before you get into a trade, you're not emotionally invested at all. But as I'm teaching live events, one of the things I'll normally ask people is, what's Google doing today? And if they can't answer that question, then I say, well, then all of you just let me know that you're not really in Google. Because if you were, you would be attached to it. You'd be able to tell me what Google was doing today. You would know, you would be aware of that. You'd be watching it. So there is an attachment there when we enter into a trade, when we put real money into a trade. So knowing that emotions are involved, how do we deal with those? Scripture we read that in your anger, do not sin. So it doesn't mean that we'll be absence of anger, but that we need to deal properly with that emotion. I mention to people all the time, you don't think about laughing, you just do. You know, when you stub your toe, you don't think about being upset, you just are. It's just pain. You feel it, but it's not something that you think about. Why? Because it's an emotion. So when it comes to dealing with emotions and trading, I think it can help us to know how to prepare for that battle, if you will. Okay, so how do we fight these emotions? How do we handle them in a proper way, as the Bible would say? One of the things is to simply be aware of the emotions that you're going to feel. So we've talked quite a bit about fear and greed. I've mentioned that, in every trade that you make, but also from a much larger perspective, we really have to answer the question of whether or not our desire for success is greater than our fear of failure. And that's true over the long haul, as I mentioned, but also for each individual trade. Every trade I get into, I may have an expense, and there's an emotion that's tied to the idea that I could lose money. I'd be better off not doing this trade. I would have more money in my account if I simply didn't even do this trade. But the only way to make money in the market is to actually be in the market, which means we have to trade, which means we have to be willing to take a risk. And as the people of God, we ought to be ready to do so. Somewhere along the line, Christians have become very risk averse. And that's certainly not the idea that the early believers would have had, that they knew that just by claiming to be a believer, they were putting themselves in a risky situation. So, um, you know, the Israelites throughout history have been in risky situations and have been called by God to do things that required them to take great risk. So we shouldn't be risk averse as believers. In fact, we should be ready to head into risky situations, but also having wisdom in how we approach those things and how we prepare for dealing with those things. So how do we prepare for the battles that are to come when it deals with particularly the emotions of patience and discipline? So one of the biggest things I would go back and tell people that have been with us for a long time is, no matter what you think about anything else that you learn, you have to realize that there is a potential for you to lose money here. And when we say that we want you to lose little, we really mean it. We really do want you to lose little. But what ends up happening is people that get into a trade, they do their due diligence most of the time. They put in the effort. They really feel like, hey, I've done everything that you guys have taught me to do, and so this trade ought to work. And then if they get in a trade that doesn't work, they become very emotional. They start questioning kind of everything. Did I see something wrong? Did I do something wrong? Is the system broken? Does it not really work? Did I just waste a bunch of money just even investing in this system? Does it not even work like they told me that it would? Or is it just me? Why does it seem like every trade I get into doesn't work, but the things that I didn't do, they work out greatly? Why is that? So we start to have this and kind of upswelling of emotion. So here's another trade that's not working. Oh, great. Another trade that's not working. So now we start to kind of compound things that may or may not even be related, right? This individual trade has nothing to do with your previous trades. And yet we start to link it together as if it did. Right? We do that in our lives as well, right? So something's going wrong, and then you get a flat tire. You're like, oh, of course I got a flat tire. And then some uh, piece of equipment goes out at home, and of course it did. And then something happens at work, and you're like, why would it not? So we kind of get this snowballing effect. So we kind of do the same thing with life, and we apply that same idea to trading. It's like we link things that are not linked. And so I want to encourage you to try to disengage, right? Each individual trade from the previous trade, unless there's something there, right? Something there, there's a pattern here, in which case you ought to be learning. But if that's not the case, and these are two very separate trades, two very separate patterns, to try to see that this is its own trade. All right. So try to not link it to a previous trade. Try not to link it to your past history. Just look at this trade for what it is right now. So trade in the present. This trade, what should I do with this trade at this time? And if you do that, it will help you begin to deal with the emotions of saying, this trade isn't working. Saying this trade isn't working is very different than saying, I don't know what I'm doing. This doesn't work. You see the very big and real difference there? This trade versus me, or versus the whole thing. It's a very different mentality to be able to separate and compartmentalize. This trade is not working, and then to go in there and dissect why this particular trade is not working the way that you thought. Was it due to market tone? Was it due to pattern? Was it due to maybe misunderstanding that that's a particular trade and you just simply didn't know what that trade was supposed to do, but it's actually doing something that makes a lot of sense? So rather than just kind of lumping it together and saying, it's just me or the system or whatever, try to individualize this particular trade. And then, quite simply, guys, stop out when it is required. So we want you to have patience when your trade is not, or when your trade is working. We want you to have patience. But when your trade isn't working, we want you to display discipline. Okay. So if the trade is not working, one of the questions that you really ought to ask yourself, and answer it honestly: if I wasn't already in this trade, would I get in now? Okay. So if I wasn't already in this trade, would I get in now? So in other words, you bought a stock, you thought it was going to go up, and now it's broken through support. It's still going down. Should you stop out of that trade? Well, if you weren't already in this trade, would you get in now? If the answer is no, then you've already answered the question as to whether or not you should stop out, and the answer is yes. If you wouldn't get in that trade now, then you shouldn't still be in that trade now. It's a very honest assessment, which will help you realize, if I wasn't in this, so obviously it's emotionally tied. I'm emotionally tied to this thing, because if I wasn't in this stock, I wouldn't get in it right now. I wouldn't get in it at this time. Well, if you wouldn't get in it at this time, why are you willing to stay in it at that time? If the premise of the trade has been broken, then you're simply staying in because it's emotional. What is the emotion that's involved here? Well, you're afraid, right? You're afraid of what? You're afraid that if you get out now, the stock will turn around and then go up like you thought, and then you'll be very disappointed because of your timing. All right. But what you should be afraid of is that the stock continues to drop and that you lose even more money, which is way more common than you get out and then it turns. I'm not saying that won't ever happen. It likely will happen. You'll get out and then the stock will turn and do exactly what you thought. But more often than not, when your stock is falling, it's going to continue to fall till it hits the next layer of support. And if that next layer or level of support is significantly deeper, then that just means you're going to lose more money. Not only that, guys, even if it does pivot at a lower point, you're teaching yourselves very bad trading habits. And really, that's almost as detrimental as one singular trade that ends up working, is that you end up creating bad trading habits and going, well, that one time I stayed in that trade and then it pivoted and came back up. And I'm going to make that a habit now. Every trade that goes against me, I'm going to stay in and wait till it pivots and comes back up. And then you look at a trade and go, wow, this one is not coming back up. I don't know if it's ever going to be green again, you know? And so what we don't want you to do is create bad trading habits. So a lot of people say that stopping out is a discipline issue. But one of our speakers a long time ago said it's much deeper than that. If you have a plan that says, I'm going to enter this trade here, I'm going to set a target up here, I'm going to stop out here. If you have that plan and you stick to that plan, then it ought to help you to win big and lose little, because it has everything to do with your entry point, your target, and your stop out, right? But to not keep your word is not merely a discipline issue, it is an integrity issue. If you said, I'm going to stop out if this happens, and you don't do it, then it's not simply a discipline issue, though it is. It's an integrity issue. It's you not doing what you said you were going to do. All right. So I'm going to challenge you guys with that. Okay. To realize stopping out is important, but it's not just a discipline issue, though it is, but it's also an integrity issue. And it's also a foundational issue for me forming good habits, to realize this trade isn't working. I need to stop out of this trade because I don't want to lose more money and create bad trading habits. So discipline to stop out when necessary. Patience. When do I need to exhibit patience? When my trade is actually working, when it's going the way that I want it to, it's doing what I thought it was going to do, but it's taking longer than I thought it would. If your trade is still working and it's still going the direction that you desired, it's very hard to be patient because we kind of don't trust the system either. So ironically, when we don't stop out, we don't trust the system. And when we sell too early, we don't trust the system because we think, oh, it's not going to go as high as I thought. Well, if you don't have a particular reason to sell now, then you ought to stay in. So what are some of those reasons why you should stay in? Your trade hasn't reached its target and market tone is still moving in your direction. What are some reasons to get out? Market tone has changed significantly and your stock starts to move down with it. That would be one of the biggest reasons to get out sooner. Okay. So in that situation, that's not just merely a matter of having patience. It's a matter of saying, look, the market tone has become uncertain, or the market tone has moved against me, and I don't want to be in a trade where I'm fighting the market tone. So in that situation, we actually don't want you to have patience. We actually want you to lock in that profit, go ahead and sell. So if you see market tone turning against you, but your stock hasn't reached your target price, okay, go ahead and get out. But market tone is still in your direction, your trade is still working, the premise is still in play, then have patience to let that go up. Now, you can pyramid out, which means to sell portions here and portions there. But really, for the most part, guys, we want you to make as much as possible. Win big and lose little. Well, how do you do that? By trying to let your stock do what the pattern indicates. So if you should stick with that trade longer, be committed to sticking with that trade as long as you can, as long as it is still working and it's viable to think that your trade ought to continue to work. So those are some of the emotions that you're going to deal with. This is going to be something that you're going to continue to engage with over time. As you trade through the years, you're going to deal with these emotions. You're going to be dealing with these two particular things, discipline and patience, over and over again. And hopefully what you'll do over time is to be able to establish the ability to know when you ought to be doing one or the other, and to be honest with yourself based on what the stock is doing and not just simply dealing with emotions. So thanks for joining us for another edition of Tip Tuesday. We really hope that this helps you in your trading journey, because we know it is an emotional journey. We want you to enjoy it, to have fun with this. Of course, we're going to have a lot more fun when we're making money. So we'd encourage you to realize that part of making money is stopping out when necessary and then sticking with the trade when that's what we ought to be doing. So patience and discipline. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you guys next time.